This is an Apostrophe podcast production.
Beatlology.
Genny Schorr has led 10 incredible lifetimes. At least that's what I felt after reading her new book titled All Roads Lead to Punk, riding the first wave of the phenomenal Los Angeles punk scene through music and fashion. As we'll soon hear, Genny was part of one of the very first female punk bands in Los Angeles and opened for such major acts as Elvis Costello and the Attractions and Devo. She was a co-owner of a vintage fashion store frequented by all the rock stars of that time. She was a wardrobe stylist for artists like the Bangles, Tom Petty, and Nick Lowe. She's met George Harrison. She has partied with Paul McCartney. Great story there. She also styled and toured with Linda Ronstadt. Her spouse is Kosh, who was the creative director of Apple Records for the Beatles, and who designed some of the greatest album covers of all time, including 26 album covers for Linda Ronstadt. Whew! As I said, Genny's had 10 incredible lifetimes. So, Genny, let's start at the very beginning. So, I was born in a small mining town in northern Canada. You were born and raised in Los Angeles, a very different experience. What was it like growing up in Los Angeles and being raised in Los Angeles in your time?
Yes, I was born on Sunset. It was amazing, really, to be brought up in the 60s. You know, my parents came from New York. They had a very liberal background. They were actually pretty hip for their time. So they took us to Lovin's, and we were at a peace march with Martin Luther King, which launched the Summer of Love in 1967. I was first introduced to Elvis Presley by my first babysitter, Jill. And then we saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and that kind of rocked my world, so to speak.
I bet everybody says that. Was that the moment music really ignited in you, Genny?
I remember listening to Chubby Checker. I think that was the first song I ever heard was The Twist. And I don't know, I always had stars in my eyes, I have to say. And I was always already styling myself with petticoats because when I was 4 and 5 years old. So I don't know, I was kind of primed for it, and I don't know why.
I guess the Beatles was the first time you saw a band in action because Chubby Checker, Elvis were solo acts.
Yes. And I think Elvis was kind of banned for shaking his hips from the boob tube or whatever. But the Beatles were young and infectious. And I think it is a story that a lot of people do tell, that was the sort of life-changing experience. And then we moved to North Hollywood to a condominium, which I don't know if many people lived in condominiums yet, but I had a new babysitter named Cookie, and she taught me how to play guitar. And she had a folk duo and hung out on the Sunset Strip at Pandora's Box, and she was performing. Yeah, she was pretty young though. I think she could be more than 18 years old at the time. And that was probably 1965.
So you learned guitar, and then I guess at some point you'd think to yourself you want to start a band or get into a band.
Yes.
How old would you be then?
That would be high school. And I graduated from my nylon string guitar to an electric guitar. I somehow convinced my parents to buy me a Les Paul Jr. and a mini practice amp. And I thought it was really cool, but guys at my school, sort of like the makings of Toto, they weren't into female rock guitarists. It was sort of a similar story to Joan Jett in a way. It just wasn't accepted, you know? And I did try out for the Runaways, and the original three-piece lineup, and of course Kim Fowley was there running the show. I wasn't really a lead guitarist at that point, and I just kind of threw together something from a Lou Reed album, and he told me I needed to lose weight. I had several little run-ins with Kim Fowley that were sort of crappy. And when I finally did meet my band members in 1976 through via a Dr. Feelgood show at the Starwood, and then this after party at the Continental Riot House, as we like to call it, I did finally meet my band members. I did audition for one more Kim Fowley band, don't ask me why, but Venus and the Razorblades. But I did finally meet the women that would become my band members.
You said in your book that it was very difficult to find other like-minded female musicians at the time, right?
Yeah, there wasn't many. I mean, there was people that came before us, like Fanny and things like this. The time that we got together, it was sort of glam, which turned into punk. So we were sort of comprised of almost like groupies, but groupies that wanted to be in a band, you know?
Right.
So I had been running away to Hollywood, by the way, in high school because my mother got sick, and then she did succumb to her illness when I graduated high school. So I was already running away to Hollywood, like in sort of mid 70s. I started seeing bands play live. The first band I saw was the Kinks, and I fell in love with them. But I was running away with this kind of, she was pretty wild. Her name was Robin, and I really cared for her a lot. And we were going to the Rainbow, to Rodney's English Disco. In the Valley, it was the Sugar Shack. And we were really in our wild era. And I don't think I would have rebelled that hard if my mother hadn't gotten sick, but I really needed an outlet. And I really wanted to find other musicians that, you know, would accept me. So my other bandmates were also hanging out at the Rainbow, but they were working in the industry. Marina, she was like a rock journalist for Teen Magazine, and there was other women that were working at record companies and things like that. So that everyone had like a dual lifestyle in a way.
Right.
And when we started our band, we all eventually came up with punk names. So I was Jenny Body. Marina, who was Joanne, became Marina Del Rey. Our bass player, Joanne Spock Dean, well, she became Spock because Dave Vanian named her Spock because she was like a lover of science fiction. So we all like took on punk names. And then we had Holly Vincent. I think she was at one time called Barracuda Majors or something like that. So we helped sort of build the LA punk scene. Marina, who had a real job, she signed the lease for the club The Mask with Brendan Mullen because he was Scottish. So we co-signed the lease. We were one of the first bands in there. And then other people started seeing us play, not really knowing our instruments that well, and it sort of inspired others to do the same.
What was the punk scene like at that time in LA?
We were a bunch of weirdos, you know, a bunch of people that didn't fit in. I was my mom's golden child, but then became the black sheep of the family when she died. So we were just from all over, and we just used to hang out. We would hang out anywhere, just like at the Mask, or just like sit. There was a apartment complex called the Canterbury. And we would just like read fanzines, hang out on sidewalks, wherever we could congregate.
Was it called Backstage Pass at that point?
Well, Marina, she hatched the idea at the Rainbow, and she said to Rodney Bingenheimer, she goes, I just started a band. And he said, what's the name? And she said, Backstage Pass. And then that's how it got started.
Right. That's a great name, though. What year are we in now, Genny, when you've formed and the band's got a name and you're starting to perform around town? What year would that be, roughly?
So in 1976, we started rehearsing at Cherokee Studios, where people were there, like David Bowie, and we were like sort of a curiosity. And I think Alice Cooper may have been there as well. Then we didn't really play shows. We met Jake Rivera at this Dr. Feelgood show. He started Stiff Records, and he brought the Damned to the States. They were the first British punk band to come to the States, and they were opening up for television. Got kicked off the tour for upstaging, and then they came to LA, and he scrambled and got them a gig at the Starwood, and then he all stayed with different punk people. So they stayed with us. I was hanging out with Brian James, and he stayed, he was hanging out at our apartment, Jake, and we had to answer our phone, Stiff Records, how can we help you? And he was doing things like going to Island Records and standing on the desktops and yelling at them, trying to get Elvis Costello a deal. And we got to open for Elvis Costello. But
Amazing.
The Damned were, the Damned were the ones that said, get your asses, out of the rehearsal and do a gig. So they were the ones that pushed us to start playing. So that was 1977. And they came, I want to say, like April. Half of them stayed also with the Screamers at a punk crash pad called Wilton Hilton. And Dave Vaney was on the cover of Slash magazine, which was a pretty insane, great punk magazine. And I was heavily in all of those pages with the Screamers mostly. And so we were really good at promoting ourselves in the way, like I was pictured with Tom Petty, and the caption said, chic to chic. Backstage Pass will be going on tour with the Heartbreakers,
right,
which was all a bunch of crap. We were before we even played, we were like in British magazines and in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. I'm really excited though, because my book is in Japan, by the way, and it's all over the world now, in Europe and Australia, and really excited
Fantastic,
about that.
Genny.
Yeah.
Jump back a year for me, because you're talking about 1977. You just had this great story that happened in 1976 when you crashed Paul McCartney's party for his Wings Over America. Tell us that whole story. It's so great.
Oh, my God. Yeah, that's a good one. I was friends with a girl named Tammy Taylor. We actually auditioned for Venus and the Razor Blades together. And I don't know, we found out about this insane party at Harold Lloyd Estate, which was Wings Over America. They were celebrating their 2 best-selling albums. And so we decided to go. Now, we didn't know this, but the dress code was white. And I was not wearing white. She had mostly white. And so we had to climb over these fences, and we get there, and white tablecloths, white everything. And there's all these incredible stars, like the the Jacksons, Michael Jackson before he did anything to himself, he looked amazing. And Ricky Nelson and Frank Zappa. And I sat on Frank Zappa's lap. And Tammy had an Instamatic camera. And people just thought she was like a photographer supposed to be taking pictures. So she took everyone's pictures. It was also Jack Nicholson. Like she let me use all these photos in my book, which was just so kind and
Your
generous.
book is so full of great photos, by the way. For listeners listening to this, it's full of great photos from that era.
Thank you so much. And so everything was going well, and we got to see some of the entertainment. Oddly, also Linda Ronstadt was there, who became a big client of mine.
Which we'll talk about in a moment. Yeah.
We'll talk about that. And Nelson Riddle was like the entertainment. The Nelson Riddle Orchestra, which featured in my life later.
Right.
And so then there was the mansion, and I had to use the powder room. So we went in, and there was Paul and Linda and their children, like on the staircase. It was like, it was like a Norman Rockwell painting or something. And Tammy was going nuts, and she wanted a picture with Paul and Linda. So Linda McCartney had taken the kids upstairs, and Paul came down, and Tammy said, "Can I get a picture of you and Linda?" And he said, "Oh yeah, sure." When she comes back down. And then, I don't know, he must have like signaled to the guards or whatever. And bam, I was like, "Tammy, we need to go." She's like, no, I want to get a picture with Paul and Linda. And I'm like, Tammy. And then we got snagged, and we got, we got stuck in the tram with like some other like party crashers, and ferried back to the entrance,
Wow.
So what an experience, though. We did get to meet everybody. And then again, thankfully, I met Paul McCartney later when him and Elvis Costello worked together.
Tell me about the bands that Backstage Pass opened for. You mentioned Elvis Costello and the Attractions you opened for at the Whiskey, I think, right?
Yes, that was crazy because I guess Jake didn't want Elvis to be upstage, so he chose us, and we were a little bit inexperienced. But it was, that was November of 1977, and the Whiskey always had 2 shows a night, and they would kick out the people from the first show. So we used to like huddle like upstairs. That night we were playing, but normally we would like huddle upstairs. But we had opened we did a show. We did a debut show with Quiet Riot, who I knew from high school, my high school days. Kevin Dubrow was the first guy I ever kissed. And I knew Randy Rhoads through Kevin. So we opened for them at a hotel. I think it was called the Roman Inn. So we did that. And then we played with the Weirdos in July, on July 4th. No, it wasn't the Weirdos. They got banned for a little bit from the Starwood. It turned out to be the Screamers. It was supposed to be the Weirdos, but it was the Screamers. And we opened for Elvis, and we opened for Devo.
Devo, wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Devo were great. I didn't know what to make of them. They scared me a little bit. I don't know why.
I know. They were very unusual. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I briefly dated Bob. I don't think he spoke more than 2 words the entire time. And I thought, he's so weird. I don't know. He's so weird. But we opened also for the Mumps, who I loved. We had heard about them from Blondie, who we were hanging out with. And so we played with them at Mabuhay Gardens. And that was a wild scene. And that's also in my book. Yeah, an incredibly wild scene.
And in that whole period of time, Genny, you're underage, right? You can't even drink in these
Yeah.
clubs. Am I right?
No, I'm getting hand stamped. I'm getting hand stamped. I'm not I'm not really drinking in clubs. No. But we were doing Quaaludes, we were doing poppers, we were
Yeah.
got especially when my mom was sick and I was running away to Hollywood with Robin. We were doing all kinds of nonsense. There was orgies, there was you name it. I mean, we were grouping, we were, going out with guys in bands. We were really acting out. We were really acting out our pain. We both had a lot of pain, mine from my mother's illness and then death. And then she had a lot of pain from some serious wrongdoing by her stepfather. So
Yeah.
we were, I say in the book that sex was our superpower and we used it, but it was really coping with our mutual pain.
Yeah. You were in the band for 2 years, Backstage Pass.
Yes.
And then you make a big gear change. Tell me about that.
Her name was Tony, is Tony. And she was from Texas. She was an Army brat. She was an incredible seamstress and designer and sketch artist. And she lived on Clark Street right next to the Whiskey where it was all happening. And I met her and she ended up marrying Jake Riviera and moved to England. But before that, she was the seamstress for the band. And I was wowed by that because my mother was also a seamstress. So, and I was always looking for mommy, and she was older. And I so admired everything she did. And I was with her when she made Nick Lowe's Riddler suit with the question marks. And I was there, watching her do it. He wanted a Riddler suit. So it was shark skin. It was green, with the black question marks. It was amazing. And he wore it a lot in that period. And I was wowed by her and what she did. And she would draw rock stars in outfits. She did all Rick Nielsen's checkerboard, everything. It was her idea to come up with, I think, this certain kind of bow tie. And she made, what was it? It was Cheap Trick underwear. And then they kind of stole the idea in a way. I mean, she wasn't mad at it or anything, but anyway, she would draw, let's say, Ray Davies or Tom Petty in an outfit, go to the sound check, which you could do then. You could do all these things back then. And then she would get orders that way. They would see themselves, looked exactly like them, the sketch, and she would have them come to her apartment and they would, come up with what they wanted, and she would make custom clothes for these bands. And I thought, this is it, And so we ended up, I was actually working at a store called Straight Jacket, but then we ended up buying it and co-owning it together. And Jake was our silent partner. But I was really young. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I had chutzpah and had contacts. And I would also, any band that came into town came into Straight Jacket. So we had vintage clothes, vintage embellished clothes. We made custom clothes, and we had an autograph book, which is all the pages are in the book. And she did incredible ads, which were so clever and witty for LA Weekly. And so different rock stars would come in. But one time, someone just ambled in, and I was like, "Are you in a band?" He said, "Yeah, I'm in the E Street band." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I knew that." And it was Bruce Springsteen.
Right.
And so I ended up dressing him for the cover of Cream magazine, and that was 1981.
Wow. You also styled from that store in your book. You said Nick Lowe, as you mentioned, Squeeze, Tom Petty, Cameron Crowe, The Sparks, Split Ends. Like, what a great roster that was.
Yeah, for Cameron Crowe, I didn't exactly style him, but he was friends with Jake, and he wanted, I think, he was doing Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and he used an Elvis Costello poster. I don't know what it was, but we became friends, and he was so sweet. I almost started dating him, but then he met his Nancy from Heart.
Right.
So that kind of just, I really liked him, though, and we would talk on the phone sometimes. I really, really liked him.
He's an incredible raconteur. I really enjoy listening to him. He also has a new book out right now, I think.
Yes, he does. So exciting.
Yeah.
When I saw Almost Famous, I cried the first time.
Did you? What did you think of that? I love that movie.
I loved it, and it just made me think of some of my past, in a kind of very nostalgic, emotional way. So I absolutely loved it.
Tell us how you met Linda Ronstadt.
So I absolutely adore Linda to this day. And my spouse, Kosh, did 26 of her album covers.
Wow.
So we first met back then, by the way.
Right.
But it wasn't many years later until we got together. But Straight Jacket had closed, and I was panicking. I didn't even know what panic attacks were back then. I just know that I was having them. I didn't know what I was going to do. But Nick Lowe came into town, and he was opening up for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers at the Universal Amphitheater. And this was 1983. I think it was the spring. I had Nick Lowe tickets, and Linda had Nick Lowe tickets through Danny Farrington, who was her roommate. He was a guitar luthier. He did all that incredible pearl inlay on like Johnny Cash's guitar, and then all the British people wanted him. So he did Elvis Costello, which he still uses. He did custom guitars for Squeeze. He did beautiful stuff. And we had a lot of the same clients. So they had Nick Lowe tickets, I had Nick Lowe tickets, and we were sitting side by side. And he introduced me to Linda and said what I did, with clothing and everything. And we were watching Nick Lowe, and then Tom Petty comes on, and I said something cheeky to her. I said, I know what you're doing. And she said, what? And I said, you're checking out Tom Petty's ass. And she said, I am. She loved Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. She ended up doing a Heartbreaker song later. I think she did The Waiting. And she had me come to Peter Asher's office on Doheny. I was working for her the next day.
Wow.
I started working for her, and she was blown away by what I had brought her.
She wanted you to style her. Did she love what you were wearing? Well, how did she make that jump to hiring you to do that?
I think it was just her instinct. Yeah, probably how I looked, probably what I was dressed, that I was young. And I didn't know about the Nelson Riddle album that she was about to launch, but they were really hesitant to let her do it. There's a really cool interview about that. And she had to do one last rock tour, which was Get Closer. So I brought her all these clothes that were like petticoats that were like pre-Madonna era. And she loved them because her previous stylist, she adored. I guess she was getting married or something. And she had dressed her kind of like Beverly Hills in a way, not rock and roll, not stage clothes. And I brought her a 50s torch singer dress that was black sequin. And she was like, oh, I love this. I wish I had it, but I just already shot my album cover, and it was What's New. And she wore the dress and other things I ended up purchasing for her on all these What's New videos. And then she started touring with Nelson Riddle, and she took me around the world with her.
But she asked you to actually move into her home, right?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
She did. Yeah, she lived in Brentwood on Rockingham Avenue. Yeah, she likes living with people. She likes having roommates. And Danny lived there also, and also Nicolette Larson, and who was on tour a lot. And it was insane. So Dwight Yoakam helped me, picked me up with his El Camino, and it was insane, being buzzed into Linda's little mini mansion. I think it was previously owned by Zazu Pitts and had all these hidden staircases and things. It was wild. And yeah, I loved it. And I couldn't believe it was real. It was such a blessing to have her help me in that way.
Tell us who she was dating at the time. I didn't remember this beat.
So when she was putting the Nelson Riddle show together, there was a couple things. We went to this club to see this band, the Stepsisters, which I renamed Red and the Red Hots. And we also met Jim Carrey, who was very young. I think he couldn't have been more than 21. And because a lot of times these big acts had comedians opening up for them. So I think there was another comedian that opened up for her as well. So we met Jim Carrey, and she started dating Jim.
Ah.
But then she realized that he was very young. And there is a fabulous picture of me in a Tinkerbell outfit, and Jim and Linda dressed up as Minnie and Mickey Mouse, and we're going to the Leland Sklar Halloween party that he had every year.
Great photo.
So, but then she got introduced to Mr. Star Wars.
George Lucas.
And
started dating George. Yeah.
They were so similar. And I thought they were both so boring. They both had the same car. It was wild. So we started going up to George's, the ranch or whatever.
Skywalker Ranch?
Skywalker Ranch. Yeah. Going in Learjets. I was so scared. And with the dogs, Linda's big Akita dogs and everything. Yeah, it was crazy. And he had a daughter who was very little, Amanda. And I just remember she was pretty wild. But yeah, Linda lived across the street from O.J. Simpson.
And she had an instinct about him, didn't she?
She did. And we used to walk in the neighborhood. We would also go to Jane Fonda's workouts. We would try to be in shape if she had to go on tour and that kind of thing. And we saw OJ in his yard with his chow chow dogs, and he was scowling at us. And she said, "Jenny, I don't trust that, ma'am." And she probably knew Nicole, and luckily for her, because I think she would have gone mad, she had sold that house before the whole incidents happened. So she missed that circus.
You started styling Linda for her Nelson Riddle tours, but you also started styling her street clothes, her streetwear too, right?
Oh yeah, I did all of that. I would go and get her all of her streetwear, places like Fred Siegel's, stuff like that. My Straight Jacket was on 3rd Street. We were one of the first boutiques like that, but then the Melrose boom happened. And so I was buying stuff from her from Melrose stores as well. And she just loved it because it wasn't these Beverly Hills prices. And then I was for the Nelson Riddle stuff. I bought her tons of vintage, which you could get them for really inexpensive.
Right.
And then we
right.
had things made as well from Western Costumes. So yeah, I got to do all that stuff. It was really
And you
fun.
said in your book that dressing Linda was the highlight of your career. Why do you say that?
Well, it's one of the biggest highlights, I think, because she's such a kind, generous person. And she was just, I don't know. I got to hear her sing every night when we were on tour. And I remember saying to her, and she loved this, when we were just at home. And she also loved my songs that I was writing. I was still writing songs past Backstage Pass. When I would just hear her sing in the house with no microphone, no studio, I said, your voice is more beautiful in person. And she loved that.
Yeah.
She loved that.
And you said she was a teetotaler too, which is interesting because not a lot of rock stars were. And you said, and I thought this was very interesting, you said it added years to your life.
I've told her that, and it's true, because I also gave up like any kind of recreational drugs right before I met her. I started like really losing interest. I wasn't doing tons of cocaine, but I was doing drugs and I was smoking some. But she also had her days with drugs, I'm sure, or alcohol. I don't know. And like I'm saying, like in her SNL period, you know, and she wasn't doing any of that stuff. I mean, we were like drinking Diet Coke and things like that, but and there was like the typical chemicals of the era. Yeah, it was very grounding experience. But then later ended up touring with the Bangles, and they were more my age, but it was definitely easier to work for one person.
Yeah, than a band.
For Linda, you know, than a band.
Yeah.
And also Linda had already been through that pressure cooker of being pushed to tour. Right. So she got to call the shots at this point. She also got badly taken advantage of by Rolling Stone at the time, you know, with the Annie Leibovitz photos and that kind of thing. And just things that she would say that was like not for publication that they So she started to become very protective about her private life. She was never photographed with George Lucas.
Yeah, interesting.
Started to become pretty strict about things. And there's some interviews where she really lays it down the way she wants to lay it down, and she doesn't get prodded by nosy questions, or she won't talk about her private life.
Are you still in contact with her?
Yes.
And how's she doing?
She has the same wit and brain. Physically, she's not like she was, but she is clever and smart and has a wonderful viewpoint about the world and politics, and I adore her. And Kosh and I have both been to see her. We spent a couple Christmases with her, and we talk on the phone. And I'm also really close with her personal manager, Janet. And we also know her manager, John Boylan, was with her like since the beginning. And I'm sort of like a nerdy encyclopedia, especially about her career and her clothes. And she loves that. She wants me to help like sort of categorize some of that stuff for her, which I would love to do.
I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, Genny. When she was inducted, I was there that night.
Yeah.
Of course, she wasn't there.
No.
Where she had a lot of other really great female artists sing her music, but it was a shame that she couldn't make it.
And nobody sings her music like Linda.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
the amount of like different genres. I mean, I remember when we were doing Nelson Riddle interview, it was this Australian. He wasn't Australian, he was American, but he was in Australia. The God, Don somebody. I can't think of his name. He was very well respected, but she was saying, I think the future of pop is Latin. You know, she was really getting into she was taking Spanish lessons when I first started working for her. So she was already prepping for all these things. I also got to go to New York with her. She did an opera, which wasn't as successful, not nearly as successful as Pirates of Penzance, but it was La Boheme.
Right. I have to say that her albums with Nelson Riddle, am I right about this? That was really kind of the start of rock stars doing American standards.
100%. Right? She was the first. She was the first. And she actually did a recording with, who was it? It was sort of a friendship ender. God, I can't think of his name right now, but Jerry Wexler.
Right.
She did an initial standards. It was a little jazzier, and she felt very rushed. And it was during the Pirates of Penzance era, and she felt rushed. And she ended up deciding on going with Nelson Riddle. And she didn't know if Nelson had ever heard of her or, you know, what he would think. I mean, because rock and roll to people like Frank Sinatra and that kind of thing, they were pretty threatened by it, especially like the Beatles and all that kind of stuff.
I think the Beatles actually ended a lot of careers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you think about the Frankie Avalons of that era.
Yes.
It was hard for them to get a gig after that.
Yes. And when she did the Nelson Riddle and we went to Radio City Music Hall, and they had some of those songwriters like the Tin Pan Alley that were people that were still alive were celebrating Linda, and they felt so honored that she was doing this material. But this is the material she grew up on, you know?
Right. I remember reading that when she first approached Nelson Riddle, that he literally didn't know who she was because he existed in a different genre. And then I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, Genny, Nelson Riddle asked his daughter,
yes,
who is Linda Ronstadt? And she said, oh my God, you have to work with her.
Yes.
It was his daughter that really knew everything about Linda, not Nelson.
Yeah. Nelson was incredible. I was sitting next to him on a flight from Japan to Australia. He said, ask me anything. And I was like, I don't know what to ask. I'm like young. I was really missed opportunity because he had all the good dirt on everybody, you know, Rosemary Clooney, you know, you name it.
He's such an exquisite artist and arranger, Nelson Riddle. Even his work with Sinatra is among my favorite. Just an amazing music talent. Backstage Pass reunited.
Yes.
And tell me the story around that.
There's this woman, Terry Moreland Henderson. She is married to one of the members of a band called The Pop that was playing sort of in that era. And she put together this reunion show, and she asked us to perform, which was amazing. I think we opened up for The Pop as well, and Needles and Pins, and there was a lot of bands of that era. And so Marina and I had played for years, you know, but it's like riding a bike. I've been playing since I was 8 years old, you know? So we ended up getting some of our friends that were good musicians and good harmony singers, and we reunited, and we did this show, and a lot of people hadn't seen us. It was amazing. We only did like 3 songs, and then we started playing other shows, and then COVID happened, and that kind of kind of put the kibosh on things.
So that was 2018, Genny. So it was 42 years, or if the math is right. Yeah, wow.
Yes, yeah.
And what was it like to get together again?
Fun, but band dynamics never change.
Is that right?
That way.
Even after 42 years?
Never change. Ask anybody. They never change. So, but it was great. And it was great to kind of see what we could have sounded like if we developed a bit more. Because we had this opera singer who sang backup. She just loved it. And it was just kind of fun to see it with like a little bit more musicianship, a little bit more harmonies.
Yeah.
A little bit more groundedness. But I don't think we'll do anything in the future. But my book comes with our original demos.
Yes.
Which is, 2 songs from the original demo. It comes with a 45 single. And Kosh designed the single cover and the book cover. And
there's QR codes.
Yes.
There's QR codes in the ebook. Is it also in the printed book too?
Yes, to some of the songs I had written after Backstage Pass that I really adored. I ended up doing a demo in England at Nick Lowe's studio. I also did a demo in Texas with Golden Earring.
Radar Love.
Tony was dating the lead singer, Barry, at that time. When we did the Texas demos. And then her brother, Tom Wright, who photographed The Who in their early stages.
Yeah.
He, Pete Townsend says that he's partly responsible for helping them break out. I think they met him in art school. Like I said, Tony was an army brat, so she lived in England. So her family lived there, and that's how Tom met The Who. So Tom, he produced it.
What was it like to look back on your life to write this book? What was that experience like for you now that it's done?
It's a little bit gnarly. It's like 30 years of my life, I would say. It was gnarly. I did a lot of crazy things. I dated a lot of rock stars. I got my heart broken several times. I was experimenting. I was bisexual. I was that was one thing that happened too, where Kim Fowley outed me for being bisexual in front of a crowd. I wasn't ready to come out in that way. It was emotional because of my mom's illness and death, and I was remembering things that some of it was painful.
Yeah. Did you keep journals when you were going through all this?
It feels like a journal. One compliment someone gave me was my neighbor. He's in the film industry, and he said, I felt like I was reading like a diary of a 15-year-old. And you sounded like a 15 and 16-year-old, and he loves it, So I've gotten so much great feedback and things. I never knew if people could relate to it. I think 2025 has been such a shitty year in a lot of ways. And I think this maybe provides some kind of entertainment, some kind of outlet, some kind of something. It's like juicy, it's like juicy 70s stories, 80s stories. I think some people can relate to it that have had trouble with their family, Certainly there's been a lot of strife this year politically where families are like splitting apart. I'm really glad that my book came out this year. It was like therapeutic for me. It was good for me. It's been great to put myself out there, and people seem to really dig it. And I didn't know how people would respond, but I've just gotten these like incredible notes from people, like just saying it's sexy, but it's emotional, and it's I can't put it down. Linda's manager, Janet, she read it in one night.
Is that
She
right?
said, I made myself a cup of tea. And I said, you already read it? And she was just like, I laughed, I cried,
Yeah.
I've gotten some incredible response and people telling me that it was so well written. I just didn't know. I just never expected to hear those things, but I'm so pleased.
It's so enjoyable, Genny, and it's all of those things, by the way. And I just thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I really, really did.
I love that.
That was my interview with Genny Schorr. Her book, All Roads Lead to Punk, is available now, and all proceeds from the book benefit Junior High LA, which is Genny's adult child Eden Haynes' nonprofit, which is a community art space and safe space for people who feel marginalized. A big thank you to Genny Schorr, and as mentioned, her spouse is Kosh, who was the creative director of Apple Records, and you can hear my interview with Kosh right here on your podcast app. I'm Terry O'Reilly. This episode was recorded in the Terrestream Mobile Recording Studio. Director, Callie O'Reilly. Producer, Debbie O'Reilly. Chief Sound Engineer, Jeff Devine. Tunes provided by APM Music. Follow me at Terry O Influence. This podcast is powered by Acast. Stay tuned for more Beatlology interviews coming up.